Good evening, gentlemen. Mr. Clerk of Committees, are we good to go?
We are recording.
Excellent. All right. My name is Corey Thomas. I'm the City Councilor, Ward 7, and I'm the Chair of the Public Works Committee. Today is Tuesday, October 26th. The time is 7:01 p.m. Pursuant to the suspension of certain provisions of the open meeting law, this meeting of the Public Works Committee will be concluded via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. We will post a comprehensive record of these recordings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Melrose website and on mmtv/mmtv3.org. The public can find online access instructions to view this meeting at www.cityofmelrose.org/remote-meetings. In lieu of a roll call vote, again, I'm Corey Thomas, the chairman. I'm joined by Vice Chair, Councilor Garapay, voting member, Councilor McMaster, voting member, Councilor Eccles, and voting member, Councilor Stewart. Also joined by President ex officio, Councilor Christopher Sinella. Now is a portion of the Public Works Committee meeting where we have public comment. Mr. Clerk of Committees, are there anyone here that wish to speak before the committee for public comment?
We did have one, we do have a few participants, I believe, that have their digital hands raised.
Hi, everybody.
Sweeney, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good to go.
Great. Thank you. Finn McSweeney, 160 West Wyoming Avenue. Just a couple comments specific to the agenda item tonight. To start, I think that I don't know who was on the meeting last night, but something I really want to stress as a resident is that I'm so appreciative of the fact that the city did this pilot project. I think it's great, and I want to encourage the city to be more proactive doing pilot projects with the goal of traffic calming in Melrose. There's actually one of the action steps that was recommended in the city's most recent master plan was to develop the capacity to do these. We all know that traffic safety is one of like the biggest concerns, maybe the biggest concern that people hear around Melrose. And to have the ability to pilot interventions, which can make people feel more comfortable in their neighborhoods, I think it's awesome. During COVID, the city developed a sort of like a pilot program called Shared Streets, Slow Streets, that was funded via a MassDOT grant. That's been super popular with the residents. As I understand it, there's a lot more demand for that program than the city can accommodate. But it's only for streets with lower traffic volumes. And so when you have neighborhoods that are along collector roads, like Main Street, say, if they were to apply for the city's program, the city would say no. And so if we're committed to being more proactive, and I think we need to be, then we need the ability to operate pilots on collector roads. And that's what the city did here. And I think it's great. The specific operational aspect that really didn't get touched upon last night, that I'm hoping can be part of tonight's conversation is the ability to use safe hit posts in these pilots. The city contemplated doing safe hit posts on Main Street, and in their narrative, they said they didn't want to do it primarily, I think, because of snow removal concerns, which is a totally legitimate, concern. If those things are up, you have to make a decision. Are you gonna plow with special equipment around them, or are you gonna pull them out of the road and then plow and then put them back in? Are you just gonna take them down for the winter and then put them back up in the spring? There are questions that a lot of other cities and towns around us are developing answers to, and it's not clear to me what the city's specific operational concerns are, or if the city's looked at like a gap analysis of what it would take to be able to operate projects in Melrose using safe fit posts. It's really important to remember that this is not like a bike lane thing. This is they're applicable in a lot of different contexts. The city actually appropriated money over a year ago to do a pedestrian median on West Wyoming. It's still not in. I don't know what the status of it is. But you can use them to create more defined medians. You can use them to create pedestrian bump outs. You can use them to shorten turning radius at an intersection. There's a lot of different ways that you can use these, and I think that it would be really popular with residents if the city started to do these more. So I'm hoping that if there are specific snow removal concerns, those can be discussed tonight, and we can figure out what DPW needs to be able to use these around Melrose. Thanks everyone for the time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McSweeney, and thank you very much for your continued involvement in civic matters in Melrose. I just want to let the record reflect that I wanted to move by unanimous consent to open public comment. Barring any objections, we'll open public comment. I put the cart before the horse, but that's how I roll sometimes. Mr. Clery committees, do we have anyone else?
We have Mr. Gordon. He emailed the council earlier wishing to speak. Mr. Gordon, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for
Mr. Gordon, I'm sorry, welcome. Can you just state your name and address for the record, please?
Sure. I am William Gordon. I live at 178 Main Street, Melrose, which means
Welcome,
on the southbound side of Main Street. And until August of this year, and I don't know exactly why we were up in Maine and we came back and our parking on Main Street was gone. We had received no notice this was going to happen. And we have no idea what legal process was up until today to take that away without notice. Let me talk to you what this configuration has done to us and others on the southbound side of Main Street or on. We have concerns here, and I want to thank the mayor and the director of public works, and I know a couple of other staff members came out to meet with us several weeks ago, but it was already too late because we had lost our parking and Main Street had been made dangerous. And we explained there were a couple of different dangers. One of them was going northbound by putting the parking outside the bike lane. They put the parking in what was traditionally a travel lane. We said this is going to invite an accident. And the next night, 2 cars were totaled because as a car was trying to make a left turn on Lodge, a car behind it went to the right and crashed into a car parked in one of the designated parking spaces. So that was unsafe. And then the response has been, well, we saw the accident. Now we're going to do away with that part of the plan. Now, on our side of the street, what we explained also is it's our custom, and some people will pull directly into their driveway and then pull back out and do it carefully. We've found that it's probably safer when going onto Main Street, which is a busy thoroughfare, to back in, to pull over to the curb and back into your driveway and then pull out. Well, because of the change of the configuration southbound, the traffic was moved closer to our side of the street. But if you remember Main Street, it's tree lined. And if you try to look down Main Street at the oncoming, you can't see them. So that was one problem. The other problem is when we pull over to back in with bike lanes, cars coming down the northbound side wouldn't stop. They would cross over as a practice, cross over the yellow line and just go around us as we're stopped there to wait for traffic to go by so we can pull back in. So one of the things we asked was to put the yellow line back to where it was so that if we pulled over, cars would have plenty of room. We were told the yellow line's going to move, but not to where it was. So that's simply unacceptable because it's an unsafe situation. There was no analysis about sight lines. I worked in a planning department 40 years ago. You don't make a change like this without figuring out what's going to happen to sight lines. None at all. And people were explaining they could not see on both sides with what had happened with this configuration. So I don't know what kind of planning, other than finding data which supported putting in bike lanes. It was cherry-picked data which really loaded the process. And the current administration seems to want to do this no matter what. And I understand the need for the bike lanes, but this community, Lower Main Street, wasn't involved in the conversation. We came one day and saw that our parking was just dramatically altered. Our lane configurations were dramatically altered. This is a dense populated area, a lot of single homes, one after the other, followed by an apartment building, followed by another apartment building, followed by another apartment building. And in the current configuration, 3 of those apartment buildings have these bike lanes. They, at least in the new proposal, are only going to do that at 1 parking building. And as one person pointed out yesterday, people who live in apartment buildings tend to be lower income, and this felt or was represented, was explained, you know, this is not welcoming to low income people if you're going to take away their on-street parking. It makes it more difficult for them. Now, let me talk to you about other people and the difficulties. On our side, they want to permanently take away the parking. Some of us are over 65. I'm in that class. Some of us have medical disabilities, and I know them, and I have some of my family. So it becomes difficult because now, if, you know, there are 2 of us who have cars. If one comes home before the other, and that one who comes home is not going to leave first thing in the morning, then that car is the one who's going to leave first thing in the morning. The one who comes in later has to pull in. What we do in the past, in the evening, you could leave your car for an hour or 2 or 3, because if it's after 6, you could do that on Main Street, and people could, and then you could leave your car there, and the other partner could come in, pull their car in, and then that person could then pull the car in. We can't do that anymore. Now, if we want to do it, we have to be on the other side of the street. So you're forcing us to be pedestrians on a very busy street. And the one thing I learned, I'm a lawyer, and 30 years ago, I had a case, terrible accident where 3 people, a mother, a 7- and 6-year-old, were hit by badly designed crosswalk. They were hit in the crosswalk, and 2 of them died, the mother and the 6-year-old. And we brought in an MIT engineer, and he said, what you want to do is keep pedestrians outside the road as much as possible. You make your crosswalks as perpendicular because it's the shortest way across. And you reduce your opportunities for pedestrians and cars, because guess what? Physics. Whenever a car collides with a person, the car wins, the person loses. And that also happens with bikes too, because there's no way the mass of the bike is going to be able to deal with the mass of the car traveling at a certain speed, legal speed. So if we want to, if we have to park on the street, so the other one has to come in, we have to now cross over Main Street. So you're endangering us, you're increasing our risk. We have people here. My neighbor is a cancer survivor. He's near 80 years old. He can't cross Main Street. He did not go to the abutters meeting. He wanted to, because he was right across the street from us. He cannot safely cross Main Street. He has a family who comes to visit him. They can't do on-site parking. He has landscapers who do he used to take care of his property diligently all the time. Now he's a landscaper. Where are they supposed to park? There's no parking there anymore. He has people come and and remove the snow. They come with a truck and snow blowers and a crew. Where are they supposed to park? Now they're forced to park on the other side, and they're going to have difficulty. His is just an example. I have a neighbor to the other side whose first language isn't English. I don't think anyone reached out to them about the inconvenience to them. And I've talked to a number of people on Main Street. This is the safety concerns of the people who live on Main Street is simply discounted and not taken anything to put in these bike lanes on this busy thoroughfare without talking to us first and then trying to mitigate the damage that this pilot project has created. So those are our thoughts. And let me just end with one thing. With the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is supposed to guide, it's put out by Federal Highway Administration, and section 1A02 of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Anybody who does pavement markings, and I learned this years ago, this is the text that you go with, the guide. And it says, to be effective, a traffic control device should meet 5 basic requirements. And the fourth one is command respect from road users. When you design a pavement markings where people will routinely cross over the double yellow line, you have not created the appropriate markings because they're not being respected. It is a bad plan that has a bad impact to the abutters here. And let me just say one other thing, that there was a very good speaker yesterday who made plain that we don't appreciate that we're put in an adverse position to bike users. We think something has to be done to help them, but we have been an afterthought. We have been an obstruction. We're viewed as an obstruction to bike lanes rather than a conversation being had before this was imposed upon us. Thank you for giving me the time to speak.
Mr. Gordon, thank you very much for speaking before us. Mr. Clerk of Committees, are there anyone else here for public comment?
At this time, I don't see anyone with their digital hand raised. Not at
All
this
right,
time.
seeing no more in attendance for public hearing, barring any objections, I'd like to move by unanimous consent to close public comments. We have one order before the Public Works Committee tonight. It's order 2022-45, an order seeking information on the administration's proposal to create permanent bike lanes on Lower Main Street. Mr. Clerk of Committees, do we have some members of the administration here to talk on this order?
We do. I'm letting them in as we speak.
Good evening and welcome, everybody. Thank you, Paul, for being here.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I think we need to suspend the rules.
Thank you, Councilor Stewart. Do I have a motion to suspend the rules?
Motion to suspend the rules, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion to suspend the rules by Councilor Stewart, seconded by Councilor Garape. Can you call the roll?
Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Garape,
Yes.
Councillor McMaster,
Yes.
Councillor Eccles,
Yes.
Councillor Stewart,
Yes.
President Sanella.
Yes.
6 yes.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk of Committees. The rules are now suspended. Welcome, distinguished guests. Thank you for being here. We already have a couple councilors with their hands raised. Are there any comments that want to be made by the administration before, or do you want to just go into questions from the councilors? Seeing none. Councilor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will actually cede my position to the next councilor. Thank you.
Councilor McMaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilor Stewart, for deferring. And I appreciate that as the maker of the order. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to start this evening with Ms. Phillips. Perhaps if we could ask her questions after I'm done with asking Ms. Phillips questions. Have other councilors ask any questions of her before moving on to Ms. Parakis Ellis, then Chief Lyle, and Chief Kalina, if that is okay with you.
That works with me, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Ms. Phillips. Thank you for being here. It's nice to see you back in the virtual chamber. I don't think we've seen you here since you came before us for your appointment. So welcome back.
Good evening. Thank you.
Can you please introduce yourself for the public and explain your role as city solicitor?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the city solicitor for the city of Melrose. So in that role, I provide legal counsel to city council, the mayor, department heads, any multiple member body or commission within the city. Also in that role, obviously, that includes drafting written legal opinions when requested, relative to those respective offices or departments or relating to matters within the authority.
Thank you. Many of us in the council, as you know, Ms. Phillips, have heard from residents who believe that the council has jurisdiction to approve or disapprove the creation of bike lanes in Melrose. My first question to you is more general. Does the city council have authority over the creation of traffic and parking regulations of any kind in the city of Melrose?
Generally speaking, I would say no.
And over the summer, the administration suggested that it had unilateral authority to create bike lanes because they didn't consider them to be regulatory. I challenged that idea and asked you to provide an independent legal opinion as city solicitor. That opinion is attached to the agenda packet, but for those on the council and for the public who haven't had an opportunity to read your opinion, would you summarize that for us?
Through the chair, absolutely. The Melrose Traffic Commission was created in 1998 by an enabling act by the legislature. It was approved by the city of Melrose at that time. The act gives the Traffic Commission the exclusive authority relative to any vehicular street traffic and parking issues within the city of Melrose on city-controlled public ways and streets. So to summarize my legal opinion, which took all of that into account, in this issue of bike lanes, especially in this regard, I looked at the issue of crosswalks that has previously been found to be in the legal authority, exclusive authority of the Traffic Commission. I found that in fact, bike lanes and the improvement and placement of bike lanes within the city of Melrose is within the exclusive authority of the Traffic Commission. Not only does it involve parking changes, but it also would involve the flow of vehicular traffic along the streets, which are under the control of the city. The creation of bike lanes could conceivably create additional criminal and civil violations that could be enforced by law enforcement under Chapter 89 and Chapter 90. So because of that and the broad language of the authority given to the Traffic Commission under the Enabling Act, it's my legal opinion that the approval and placement of bike lanes lies with the Traffic Commission of Melrose.
Thank you for that, Ms. Phillips. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for Ms. Phillips unless other councilors do. If not, I would be ready to proceed with Ms. Parakis-Ellis.
Councilor Eccles.
Thanks, Ms. Phillips, for being here. I just have one question, kind of speaking retroactively, both on the crosswalks and the bike lanes, right? We have them in Melrose, and we have them that were created by the city prior to separate legal opinions about the Traffic Commission being responsible for that. Is there anything that needs to be done retroactively about that, or are we good to just proceed with what we have and have the Traffic Commission be responsible for all bike lanes going forward?
Through the chair, I would have to look into that further for you. My short answer is no, I do not believe so. I think I take a very broad reading of the language within the jurisdiction of the Traffic Commission. I'm not sure what previous legal opinions provided for it, but I understand it was the practice previously to allow for bike lanes without the approval and placement. So short answer is no. If you'd like me to look into that further, I'm happy to do so.
I think that makes sense. I just wanted to know what your opinion on it was. Thank you.
Councilor Garrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might be a separate item, but it just dawned on me when you talk about like taking parking away or just in parking. If we're putting a parklet in there on a street and it's taking a spot, is that changing the parking? Does that have to go in front of the Traffic Commission? I don't know what the process is in order for that. I'm just curious if that is supposed to go in front of the Parking Commission also.
Generally speaking, I mean, I have to look at the specifics of what you're referencing, but anything involving parking changes within the city of Melrose on a city of Melrose controlled public way would involve the authority of the Traffic Commission, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's just something I thought of just when you had talked. So it's no big deal, but I was just curious on that going going forward, even though it's seasonal change. So I don't know if it's not permanent. So just curious on that. Thank you.
Are there any other councilors that have any questions for City Solicitor Phillips? Councilor Phillips, if you wouldn't mind hanging on, you can move on. Anyone have any questions for DPW Director Elena Proy-Casales?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Ms. Brocasalis. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of the work that you and your team have done to date, both on the pilot project and on the redesign. I had an opportunity last night to watch the public forum. I'm not sure how many of my colleagues did, so some of these questions are matters that you addressed last night. So if you could just indulge us and also members of the public who didn't have an opportunity last night to watch the forum. Can you generally summarize the proposed plan for Lower Main Street and how the current plan is different from the original pilot project?
Sure. So the proposed plan, the pilot project was really a little bit going out on a limb to try something completely different than anything we had done before, and try the parking protected bike lanes that they have in other communities, and the Ped Bike Committee was recommending this, and the MAPC was recommending it as a viable option. And so we, as I'm sure you've all seen, we piloted putting the bike lane up against the curb on the northbound side and the parking on the inside of that, and you know, on the travel lane side of that. And the currently proposed plan eliminates that configuration. We went into it with an open mind. I really had no preconceived notion of whether I was going to like it or not, and I know others on the city staff similarly thought this was worth trying, and we saw it in other communities. But as time went on, and as we spoke with the public safety personnel and DPW operations, and just I drove it many times myself, I biked it myself, and we just weren't pleased with that configuration for a number of reasons. The fact that there's not a lot of parking utilization along that stretch means that it's not really a parking protected bike lane most of the time. There really aren't that many cars protecting the cyclists from the drivers, and even though there's more distance between them, when you don't have that many cars parked, it becomes somewhat of a confusing situation. I think that confusion fed into the car accident that happened, where someone wasn't expecting a car to be parked where it was and ended up plowing into the back of that car. And just concerns with public safety personnel not being able to get as close to houses during emergency responses, snow plowing, to answer some of the questions during public comment. We don't have equipment that could clear. Our equipment is 5 feet wide, so depending on the exact size of a bike lane that's protected with safe hit posts, we could maybe clear it, but in some locations where bike lanes against the curb are permitted to be 4 feet, we wouldn't be able to clear it with our existing equipment. We also, that would be added time to our snow clearing, and we already have difficulty during larger storms with, you know, the sidewalk plow routes and being able to get all those done in time for school to open and the like. So we just felt as an administration that this was just not the best layout for this corridor. And so that's the major change. And then the other minor change is that we did reinstate the parking in our proposed plan along the apartment buildings across from Mount Vernon. The first 2 of 3, we reinstated the parking. And I know it was mentioned that, you know, it seems like a potentially discriminatory practice to eliminate the parking in front of the apartment buildings, but there is more than ample parking in the rear of those buildings. And so it's really more short term. It's 2-hour parking anyway. It's more short term people pulling over deliveries, Amazon, UPS, the like. And we felt that by starting the parking in front of the third building, the parking prohibition in front of the third building, there was still plenty of room based on current utilization for all of those delivery drivers to pull over in front of the other two buildings and walk a very short distance to the third building if need be. So that was the other biggest change. Also in the recommended plan, the recommended plan spans all the way to the Malden line, whereas the pilot program was really focused on the area that we're repaving between Mount Vernon and Sylvan. And so now we have much more extensive recommendations south of Sylvan that don't involve any proposed changes to parking. They're working within the alignment of the road that's available. And that would just involve blacking out some of the striping that's there and putting down new striping to make the intersections a little better defined, with turning lanes and through lanes for bikes, bike boxes and the like. That is all very safe and effective infrastructure for cyclists while not changing anything for drivers or folks parking.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, before I move on, I'm just wondering, unless we anticipate needing Ms. Phillips again, if she may be excused. She's more than welcome to stay on, but I know she's had a long day and may have family responsibilities. So certainly it's up to her, but I just wanted to ask that of you and for her consideration if she wants to depart. I would be fine with that as the maker of the order.
Thank you, Council McMaster. Again, City Solicitor Phillips, whenever you need to go, please feel free.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you,
Any
Mr.
other
Chairman.
councilors have any questions for Director Proe Salas?
I have some more, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to to see if Ms. Phillips needed to leave. So, thank you. Ms. Parakaselis, when exactly, I want to talk a little bit about process, was the decision made to add bike lanes to Lower Main Street? And I know some of the bigger picture plans for the corridor, as I understand it from having spoken with you, predates this council and even my time on the prior Board of Aldermen. So if you could just talk a little bit about the decision-making process.
Yes. So back in 2016, when we instituted our Complete Streets plan, Complete Streets policy as a community, we started on the Complete Streets prioritization plan process. That process involved a working group where we had representation from the council, from the planning department, engineering, outside groups like Birth to Five. Actually, Kate Lipper-Garabedian was our representative from Birth to Five at the time. A number of stakeholder groups, the Pedestrian Bike Advisory Committee. I won't pull up the list and bore you, but it was a substantial group of folks. Sergeant Gawk from the police, Stephen Fogarty from the athletic department at the schools. And so that group looked at information that was solicited from the public to determine where folks wanted to see Complete Streets changes. And we came up with a list of, I believe it was 43 projects around the city. We were at the Victorian Fair, we were at farmers markets, we had a public forum. And we took all those projects, and then the working group put them through a matrix exercise to rank them in terms of community priority and what they would accomplish and how many people they would serve and the like. And the Main Street Road Diet, as it was called, which is a reallocation of space within a curb-to-curb roadway, was identified as the 4th highest priority project in the city for implementation under the Complete Streets prioritization plan. So that was in September 2017 that plan was rolled out. Again, we had public input, public meetings. So that's when this discussion started. And then in 2019, when Main Street came up for paving, well, actually in 2018, when we did the bike lanes and the other bike infrastructure on both the commuter route and the neighborhood route from Wyoming to the Wakefield line, it was made clear that the reason we were stopping at Wyoming was because we were waiting for paving on South Main Street before we did any restriping south of Wyoming. Paving was scheduled for 2019, so we were talking at the time about, how to start the project then. But then paving got delayed due to utility needs. We did water main work, and National Grid did gas main work in 2020. Eversource did electrical transmission line work in 2020 into 2021. So we are finally, we assume and hope we are finally done with people needing to dig in the road. And so now we're finally at the point of paving. So we did start talking about ideas of how to do this back in 2017, 18, 19, and 20.
And was the decision to actually pursue the bike lanes, the pilot, and what would become an eventual redesign, what the Traffic Commission will vote on Thursday, was that made by a prior administration or this administration?
The road diet concept always involved some semblance of bike lanes. So that was the whole idea of the road diet. So I guess I wouldn't say it was necessarily, I mean, it was under Rob Dolan's administration that we identified that as a project and that we ranked it so high in the prioritization plan. But it wasn't until we really got into the design that we analyzed the, the exact roadway widths and went out and measured on the ground and started to lay out what could or couldn't work there. That wasn't until really June, July of this year when we were preparing to do the pilot.
And in terms of the decision-making process to pursue the pilot and what that would eventually lead to, can you talk a little bit about who was involved in the decisions and how it came about to identify certain individuals either within City Hall or any external stakeholders at all? Who was part of those conversations and how were they identified?
So back in summer 2020, we had applied for the Shared Streets grant. And at the time, that was the grant that funded the parklets, all the slow streets and shared streets infrastructure. And we included in that grant application $2,500 for temporary line tape, because our original thought was if we wanted to try to pilot something on South Main Street, we would do it as part of the Shared Streets program. We would implement it as a temporary shared streets, similar to all the other slow streets that we put in place. And so we had applied for that grant. That involved the planning department and the DPW and the mayor's office. When we received that grant, we really focused in more on the parklets and the slow streets. And there wasn't really the time or mainly the time with COVID to really get into putting that line tape down on South Main Street. So we really didn't pursue it per se. And then as we approached this summer and we started talking about, well, should we pilot something or should we just pave and then stripe the way we think we should stripe and bring anything to the Traffic Commission that requires a vote of the Traffic Commission? It was really in the June, July timeframe that we said, yeah, let's really try to pilot this. That was before the city solicitor offered the legal opinion that the Traffic Commission would need to approve bike lanes, but we were always aware that the Traffic Commission would need to approve any parking changes, any parking elimination especially, but really any parking changes. So it was kind of an evolving discussion. And then at the same time, we applied for some free technical assistance that the Ped Bike Committee sort of started that process with MAPC, and the planning department and DPW were involved in that as well. And we applied for this free technical assistance that we ended up getting, although the timing ended up not being ideal. So MAPC did provide some opinions on, they came out and did a site visit before we did the pilot. They gave us some opinions on what they thought we should or shouldn't do. They helped present at the July community forum. But that was really the extent of that, that grant, which had no monetary value. It was just some time from the MAPC. So I know you had some other questions about grants that I think I've now answered, but we had $2,500 of line tape that frankly we didn't end up using because we ended up doing actual paint at a cost of $470. And we had the free technical assistance from MAPC. So those were internal applications. But coming into July, when we were really seriously considering piloting this, we reviewed the wish list plan from the Ped Bike Committee, and we had internal discussions as to what we wanted to pilot. And then we held the community forum to discuss it with the community at large before we put anything on the ground.
Thank you. And the two grants that you mentioned, the Shared Streets Grant and the Free Technical Assistance Grant, are those the only two grants that the city received in connection with this project?
Only other money the city received from an outside source in connection with the South Main Street project was a $50,000 earmark that we spent on sidewalk block replacement in 2019, because we had applied for that, or we had requested that when we thought the project was going to happen in 2019. And we were going to put it towards any elements of the project, but in the end, the money came through before the project came through, and the only thing we could do in advance was sidewalk blocks that we were going to do anyway as part of the project. So, but yes, that is the only outside funding. And I just want to stress that I have heard comments over and over from various folks about the cost of this pilot and who's paying for it, where's the money coming from. The pilot literally cost us $470 that was paid out of the operating budget, out of our line striping item. Putting down temporary line striping is really inexpensive. And in fact, putting down permanent line striping is also really inexpensive. So this is not a costly part of this overall $500,000 Main Street project that involves utility work and paving and sidewalk repairs. This is just a minor, from a cost perspective, a very minor component.
And for the Shared Streets Grant, is there a timeline in which we would have to complete certain tasks in order to comply with any grant requirements or memorandum of understanding that we may have signed?
Yeah, so we were supposed to purchase we were supposed to spend the money for the Shared Streets Grant. I don't remember the exact deadline, but it was within 2020. And so we did. We bought all of the cones and barrels and the temporary line tape and the signs that say slow streets. We purchased all of that, and then all the parklet materials. We purchased them all within that grant timeframe.
So there's no grant that says that we have to complete the project within a certain period of time. Meaning we're not, even though we may have deliverables that have been determined at City Hall, there isn't a grant that says you have to do A, B, C, and D, other than the purchasing of the items that you mentioned. That is, I guess, accelerating the need to get this done from a grantee.
From a grant perspective, there is nothing that puts us on any schedule, any time frame for South Main Street at all.
And what about Complete Streets money, or any other money that would be used from the city to pay for the repaving? What does the price tag look like from the city side?
Complete Streets grants that we have right now, the one that we're working on now is the Hoover neighborhood. That's $400,000, and that is our only Complete Streets grant that's presently open. That does have a deadline, but again, not related at all to South Main Street. The infrastructure project itself, we had a fiscal 19 road bond that was allocated in 2018, approved by the council, and South Main Street paving was on that list and was presented to the council as part of that road bond. We have spent, the other project that's on that road bond is Woodland, where we're doing sidewalk work right now. The whole rest of that road bond has been spent. It was 1.685 million. We have about 600,000 that's been sitting in an account waiting for these two projects to be completed, and then that road bond will be done. Chapter 90 funding is just year by year. So we've had Main Street on the list, I think last year, but then when we didn't do it last year, we just, we had plenty of other work that we still had to do. So the funds just rolled to this year's Chapter 90 allocation. So there are no outside requirements. The road bond money we have to spend. I think Catherine Armada will be upset with us if we don't spend it within the time frame specified by bond council. So I think that money, in a way, needs to be spent soon. But that hasn't been any sort of a driving factor in our decisions either. It's just the condition of Main Street is our primary driving factor on needing to get this project done. We have to pave Main Street. The folks on Main Street have complained for the last couple of years. And as we've done more and more utility work, the trenches, there are more trench patches. People say their houses are shaking. The condition for drivers is really bad. The condition for the residents is really bad. So we didn't want to let it go through another winter. We want to get it paved.
And thank you. One of the things you talked about, Ms. Parakaselis, earlier in last night was the infrastructural work that's occurred underground, the water main, the gas work, and the Eversource work. I know we had an email communication, and I had inquired recently about the project dates, completion dates. Were you able to identify when those respective projects concluded?
So I did not get exact dates, but I do have them. So I know I can start with the water service work was in 2019. Let's see, water services Lower Main Street were October 2019. Water intersections on Main Street were July into August 2019. Let's see, National Grid gas work. Lower Main Street was started in September 2020 and was finished it went into January 2021, but I'm not sure if it went past January. I'd have to double check that. I haven't updated this chart for 2021 yet. But it was completed in winter 2021. And then Eversource's work was sort of intermittent because during the summer seasons, they had to stop their work because of peak electrical usage. They had to have everything up and running. But let's see, they began their project construction began in December 2019, went through May 2020, started up again in September 2020, and went through June 2021. And then they had a little bit of work that they had to do, but that was mostly on Howard Street this summer.
Okay. And so since the gas work ended in the winter of 2020 and Eversource work was later than that, do you have any concerns about those projects, or at least the latter project having not gone through a freeze cycle before repaving Main Street? Because I do know that's a consideration when we look at other streets, and I think that's just important for the council and the public to know.
Yeah, so that is certainly something that we look at on, especially on the longer trench projects. So like on the National Grid gas main work, we do like to see it go through a freeze thaw cycle, and it has. The Eversource work, the component on Main Street was really just in front of 228 Main Street. It was one access pit that they just continually accessed for months at a time, and then close it up for the summer, and then access the same spot again. And we closely monitor their compaction. Their trenches haven't settled. They actually provided us with a payment in lieu of pulling up and doing a permanent patch in that location, pulling up the patch that they put in, which is what they would normally do. But they've contributed the $8,000 that they would have spent toward our paving project. So given that trench has held up nicely and it was just in one spot, I think it's fine to pave, and it has been months. By the time the paving goes down, it will have been months. And
you heard that the city solicitor's opinion with respect to the traffic commission voting on bike lanes, them being regulatory. If the traffic commission decides not to vote in support of the bike lanes or other aspects of the project which are necessary in order for the bike lanes to even occur, meaning the parking regulations. What happens with the money that's been spent to date? Is there any type of a penalty that we would face?
Oh, so again, the money that we spent to do the pilot project was just the $470 on the line painting, and that came out of our operating budget. And so there's no, no one from the outside is looking in, asking how we spent that money or wanting any money back.
One of the questions that has come up, I know you've heard it, you've fielded it as well from residents, and I've heard it as the ward councilor, is whether any other designs were considered beyond the two. Were there other designs considered? And I'm assuming if they were, they probably didn't suit certain project goals or other things that you were looking at as DPW director. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so the first one of the designs that we looked at is to do what we did on the north side of the city, so north of Highland, which is to have a parking lane on both sides, followed by a bike lane, followed by the 11-foot travel lanes. We were not able to fit that here. My hope was that that was kind of our worst case scenario, was that if the city didn't approve, the traffic commission didn't approve the reduction in parking, we would just put in the bike lanes in either direction the way they are on the north side. We realize it's not the greatest configuration for cyclists, but it's better than not having bike lanes, and we thought that would be sufficient. But the smaller road width by just a couple feet really makes that impossible. And I wish that wasn't the case, but we can't fit what we put on the north side. So that was one we considered. We considered limiting the parking on the northbound side and keeping it on the southbound side, but there are more houses on the northbound side, and also there are more side streets on the southbound side, and so that results in fewer parking spaces because there are all those street openings at Ledgewood, Lodge, Kingsley, Woodruff, and when you take into account all those streets and the fact that you can't park within 20 feet of a street, it really makes for fewer parking spaces, substantially fewer on the southbound side than the northbound side. So we did consider that. The consideration that I would have liked to see, that I think would be the ideal for this section of Main Street, is to do a shared use path or a raised cycle track, basically a sidewalk level bike path on the southbound side, or on both sides. We looked at it on both sides, moving the curb out into the street by about 5 or 6 feet, and having on each side, and having the bikes up at sidewalk level on the other side of the grass strip. So you have the sidewalk separated by the trees and the utility poles and everything. Then you have the bike lane, and then a curb, and then parking on one side, and then 2 travel lanes. That, to do it on both sides, added about $500,000 to the project, and the curb on one side would have been directly over the gas main for the majority of the length of the gas main, so that's just not feasible. And then we looked at doing it on the southbound side, which was more like a $400,000 project because you only have to move one curb, but you did have to do quite a bit of drainage relocation and the like. And while I think that is a potential long-term project for the city and something we should seriously consider, it is far more extensive in terms of design, drainage design, survey. It's just a different scope project. It's more of like a tip project, like what we did on Lebanon Street, where the federal government funds it, and you meet all the Mass DOT standards, and you have a design engineer who puts full plan and spec out to bid. And so that's just far beyond the scale of the money that we have and the need to just pave. We need to pave this section of roadway, and I don't see paving this and putting line striping down as precluding considering that more robust project in the future. I don't think it's a lost cost because we have to pave the rest of the road one way or another. So So those are all the options that we considered. And, you know, we were really left with, and then the pilot and then the recommended plan. Those are the other two. So we were left with really those two viable options, and we, in the end, didn't like the pilot configuration that much. And so now we have the recommended plan.
One of the questions that has come up with respect to the southbound bike lane is, why does it start where it does at Mount Vernon, and why not further down at Potomac and maybe have Sharrows earlier? I've heard that from a few residents, those who live near Caruso's and closer to Mount Vernon. So is there a particular reason why it starts where it does southbound?
That was based on our looking at parking utilization, and parking utilization, even along the portion from Wyoming to Potomac, is not huge. But we were starting the paving at Mount Vernon, so we were basically starting the project at Mount Vernon. That's how we did the pilot. Then we decided the impacts to the apartment buildings were just a little more serious in terms of, mainly in my mind, it's deliveries. They just get so many more people pulling over because of those large buildings, that if you eliminate the parking alongside all three large buildings starting at Mount Vernon, you end up with there's going to be a lot of violation of people parking even temporarily in the bike lanes. And that creates its own safety issue. And this is supposed to be a safety project. So we wanted to eliminate that safety concern. Could we start the bike lane down a little bit further? We could, you know, if there's a case to be made for that, but honestly, the parking utilization is just so minimal beyond those apartment buildings, that it's just hard to argue that, you know, if two cars are parked there at any given time, that those two cars can't park on a side street or park across the street. You know, it becomes obviously it's weighing the negative impacts on each side and the benefits. And we just felt that there is enough of a benefit with the cycling infrastructure to offset the reduction in parking when there's plenty of space across the street and on the side streets.
And for the three crosswalk locations, is there the possibility at some point in the future to consider potentially installing traffic islands, for considering the length of the road and some of the concerns that were brought up earlier? We heard Mr. Gordon talk about people crossing. There are home health aides and physical therapists and others, you know, older adults who might be visiting friends or family who can't get across the road as quickly, may not be as nimble. Is that something we could look at? Is the road itself prohibitive of considering that in terms of its size?
So if we were to put in like a median refuge island in the middle, the recommended length for those, I believe, is 8 feet. And so we would have to drastically change the layout that we're proposing in order to fit an 8-foot median in the middle. One thing we can do, though, that's common for reducing crossing distances is to create bump outs. And we can do that either with curbing or with paint. The problem with bump outs with curbing is that unless you do a cutout for the cyclists to go through, then you end up with the cyclists like on Franklin Street, where the street bottlenecks down at the bump outs, the cyclists do have to go out into the travel lane to get around the bump outs. And we've heard some mixed feelings about that. But we can also do bump outs with paint, which would in essence make a pedestrian able to safely walk to the edge of the bike lane and then wait for traffic. So they're a little more visible to the folks driving. And then the other thing is that Chief Lyle has recommended that we put in as many rapid flashing beacon push button signals at the crosswalks as we can. And so we indicated in last night's presentation that, you know, if funding allows, we will put it in one or more, as many as we can afford. There are a few $1,000s, let's see, $5,000, $6,000, if I remember correctly, for the ones that we've been purchasing recently. So, you we would like to do those at any crossings where we can.
Okay. I just have
Councilman Master,
a question.
excuse me, I'm sorry. We have Councilor Eccles in the queue as well. We can come back to you. I'd like to get to Councilor Eccles though, but we can come back to you, all right? Councilor Eccles?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions for Ms. Briggs-Ellis. Thanks for being here tonight. Can you kind of talk about a little bit more about what a road diet means, why we decided we needed that at Main Street, if we've done it anywhere else? I think that'd be helpful information.
So a road diet just means taking the width that you have available and reallocating it to try to meet our complete streets principles, which are to accommodate road users of all ages and abilities and all modes of transportation. So that would be pedestrians, cyclists, freight and commercial vehicles, regular motorists, accessibility, so ADA compliance. And so those are our goals in our complete street policy. Our policy dictates that we're supposed to apply those principles to every project that we do, whether it's a paving project, a line striping project, a large scale capital project, or a developer project review. We're supposed to apply those principles. And where we've done it in the past, Tremont Street is a good example where we have the bike lanes on one side and the sharrows on the other side and parking. That is, I would say, an example where we took a recommendation actually from a Mass DOT employee who's a Melrose resident who said, we should do this because you're repaving and we can fit this configuration. Because of the parking utilization on that stretch, because it is so intensively used, largely because of the businesses adjacent to it, I find that to be a little tight. I see a lot of people driving over the double yellow on Tremont Street, and that is a road diet that I think it's successful. I think it slows people down for sure, and it does provide some dedicated bike infrastructure. But I think that's an example of where we kind of try to squeeze in something that is a little on the tight side. But Main Street north of Highland is a perfect example where we took what was there and we just restriped it to accommodate more users of the roadway. So those are some examples.
And was speeding a problem that was being reported on that section of Main Street before the pilot? And would that necessitate a road diet?
I would say speeding, especially with our 25-mile-an-hour speed limit citywide, speeding is sort of a known entity, especially on any of our major roads, because 25 is a pretty slow speed. And on Main Street on the way to Wakefield, I mean, I can only speak anecdotally as someone who drives that, pretty much every day. And it is very rare that I'm in a line of cars going 25 miles an hour. So but when you have a wide swath like that with zero pavement markings besides a double yellow, visually you feel like you can go a lot faster. And I have noticed, again, just anecdotally, I've noticed people do drive slower through the section of Melrose from Highland to, or really from Franklin to the city limit, and people speed up in Wakefield when they no longer have the bike lanes.
Thanks. And everyone, I thought it was interesting what you said last night, and I think it might be interested or worth repeating. Everyone has off-street parking along that stretch of Main Street. Can you kind of talk? There were like the 7 and 7. That's a helpful data point, I think.
Yeah. So there are 22 houses along the stretch that would have parking prohibited in front of them. 7 of those houses front a side street. So all those small side streets. So there are 7 houses that if they want to park along their frontage, there are some restrictions in the morning up to 10 a.m. on those streets because of Oak Grove. But those folks can park on the side streets and still be alongside their own house. 7 more of those 22 are only one house away from a side street. So 14 out of the 22 can park within a house of their house on a side street and walk over to their house if they don't want to pull into their tandem driveway or block in their spouse or whatnot. And then I believe it was 15 of the 22 have single car garages in addition to their driveways. And the vast majority of them have long driveways. I would say driveways that fit 3+ cars on that side of the street. On the northbound side of the street, the driveways are much more shallow. And that's another reason why we felt that the southbound side was, if we had to eliminate parking on one or the other, that was the preferred side to prohibit parking. And then there are 45 spaces or more across the street from all of these homes. And while we recognize that people would prefer to not have to cross Main Street, when there are only at any given time 4 cars parked along the entire corridor, and if you figure half of those might be going to the northbound side, so you're talking about maybe 2 cars at any given time where someone has to cross the street to get to their house. And when you consider streets like Lebanon, Howard, Upham, where none of these folks park in front of their houses, you know, I recognize that it's a change and I recognize that it can be a hardship, but it's not like it's something that's never been seen or never been done, especially where everybody has off-street parking.
Gotcha. Thanks. And then one last question is just throughout the whole process, can you kind of talk about each instance the public has had to participate, and if that's over just yet?
Yes. Going way back to the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan, as I mentioned, there were a lot of opportunities for public input on the priorities, and that's where Main Street was identified as a priority for this type of work. Since we decided to do the pilot, we had the community forum in July. We hand-delivered notices to Main Street of that forum. We had the survey that we put out starting in September. We didn't want we put the striping down in August. We didn't want people to weigh in with their opinions a week after the striping went down because we didn't want to be reactionary. We wanted them to really give it some thought. So in September, we put out the survey on SurveyMonkey. We received 362 responses by October 13th. When I did the analysis, we received, I think, 4 more by the time I closed the survey. We had an abutters meeting. Again, we did a hand-delivered notice to the abutters. We did a roadside meeting so that it was convenient for folks. And we talked just to abutters about the specific impacts to them and tried to address their concerns with the recommended plan. We had last night's meeting. There's tonight's public meeting. And then there's the Traffic Commission meeting on Thursday. So and we've had the shared streets at citymelrose.org email address that we've repeatedly conveyed. You can submit your comments there. We got quite a few comments there. And then people know where to find me at the city yard, and some have. So there's that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that, you know, as far from a public participation perspective and, you know, with a project this big, I think that this is really kind of a model for how to involve people. There's been a lot of instances for people to participate, and I think that, you know, with the final configuration, it's probably true that not everyone got everything they wanted, but I'm very happy with the way that this went forward, and thank you I know it's been a lot of work over the past few months, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Eccles. Councilor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Perkins Ellis, for being here this evening. I appreciate your patience and full explanation of a lot of this. It's quite helpful. So I just have 2 fairly tactical questions, actually. The first is the road painting that you did on West Highland Ave, which is a one-way street, creating basically a bike. It's a 2-way, but it's just a bike lane. Did you consider that for Waverly Place? And the reason why I ask this is as you're going down, basically following the train tracks, and you go down, what is it? You go down on Berwick Street, going up to West Wyoming Avenue. That intersection between West Wyoming and Main Street can be really dicey, being on a bicycle. Whereas Waverly Place, it's a secondary street. It's one way. Did you consider that at all in the configuration?
So Waverly Place is a great consideration for a neighborhood route. Derby and Waverly is certainly something that we've considered and we've talked about. my concern with having bikes in both directions on Derby and Waverly is that we know from past traffic commission meetings that parking on Waverly is fairly heavily utilized and can be very controversial. We have a lot of people, we've had multiple requests for no parking opposite driveway on Waverly, where it gets so narrow down at the end there. You only have parking, believe on one side once you reach a certain point in the street. And then you have the folks with driveways on the opposite side of the street who feel that they can never get out of their driveways. There are a lot of multifamily houses down at that end, and there's just a lot of utilization of that parking. So I don't think we could fit necessarily a dedicated bike lane and still maintain the travel lane and the parking. On Derby, I think we could, and we could maybe even fit two-way bike lanes on Derby, but we would certainly have to eliminate parking on one side or the other of Derby, because I think on Derby you can park on both sides. So
You could-
it's
Sorry, go ahead.
definitely a viable conversation to have.
And the reason why I asked this, Ms. Burkenshaus, is when I look at the path to and from, basically you're trying to create pathway down to Malden. The southbound way, and we've heard a lot of concerns about taking away the parking, and there's some emails that came in talking about the perceived safety of cyclists that are in that now that the trees are in the way and all that. It seems as though the Waverly Place route, if you could make that just a southbound, not necessarily a two-way, but just a southbound route, and then you continue forward with the northbound route as you have it planned on the striping for the bicycles. That way you have the two ways. And when Waverly comes out down by the whole armory and everything, that's where everything I think works. So to me, it seemed fairly natural. I don't know, it's something that if it's too late to consider that, or if it's something you can look at in the future. And the reason being is it does lead into my second question, and that is on the northbound side, when you plan on striping outside the cars, on the outer stripe, that's going to be the so if you have two white line stripes, one is going to be right next to the car, one is going to be next to where the traffic flow is. On the white line that's next to the traffic flow, are you considering to have that a double white line? And the reason why I ask this, as you know, I'm an avid cyclist, and I've seen that to be extremely effective in giving a safer passageway on a more busy street where cars tend to travel a little quicker. I'd be interested in your thoughts on if you've considered that.
So we would love to put a buffer on the bike lanes on both sides of the street. But to keep the cyclists outside of the door zone, which I know on the north side on Main Street on the north side of the city, we don't have that luxury at all because of the total width of the road. In this case, we do have the luxury of having 1 or 2 feet of buffer that we can use somewhere, but we've opted to use that on the southbound side because of the concern of the residents that we thought was a very, very valid concern as to how best to pull in and out of their driveways. And with the current configuration, with the road being so wide and just having the double yellow down the middle, the residents on the southbound side can back out of their driveways and then pull straight into the traffic. It gives them kind of a little refuge before they pull into traffic, or they can pull over to the side of the road and back into their driveways. And so by using that extra buffer on that southbound side, it pushes the center line closer to where it is now and will allow about 7 feet, about the width of a parking lane, for people to make that maneuver, understanding that that maneuver will be within the bike lane, but they're going to be pulling through the bike lane to pull in and out of their driveways one way or another. So they have to be cognizant of cyclists either way. But we thought that was a good compromise for trying to help out those folks with the safety of pulling in and out of their driveways. And, both are safety issues and both are completely valid safety issues. But I think in terms of total utilization, there might be more people pulling in and out of driveways, more cars for the day than there are cyclists riding in the door zone on the northbound side. you know, we don't have those numbers, but I thought it was an equally concerning safety issue, and we had to pick one or the other. And I think because we were eliminating the parking on the southbound side, we thought that we should give them the additional buffer space.
Right. Right. Well, I think you see where I'm going on this, right? Because if you go with Waverly, then you buy yourself a couple of feet that then you can create buffer and play around a little bit. That gives you that footage that you potentially need. Just a thought, but I want to get your opinion. Those are the only questions I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Farokasas. Appreciate you.
Council Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Proakis-Ellis, for being here. Just have one quick question as I was looking at the aerials, just regarding crosswalks on the design. And maybe it's because I'm looking at the aerials. It seems like there's a big distance between one crosswalk. Looks like it's north of Potomac, then it goes south to Kingsley, and then there's one north of Lodge, and it goes south to Ledgewood. And that if there's parking only on one side, it just seems like there's a big distance between, you know, if someone was going to use the crosswalk, they got to walk south, then walk north. And I'm wondering if there's any thought to adding some in between to lessen that walking travel space by foot. And it may be because the way I'm looking at it on the map, I haven't driven it, I just noticed it. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that, if you shed a little light on that. Thank you.
So on the traffic commission agenda, I ended up including proposed crosswalks at every side street. So Mount Vernon, Potomac, Kingsley. Well, I didn't include the ones that are already there because we don't have to vote on those, but the 4 smaller streets and then Mount Vernon and Potomac, even though we didn't show them all in the recommended plan because originally we weren't talking about doing all of them. I was having a conversation with Gail and Ferna yesterday about, or maybe the day before, about the intersection at Mount Vernon, and she was saying there's a charter school bus stop there. And just in thinking about it as I was putting the traffic commission agenda together, I thought, let's include all of them, because in the past, the traffic commission is very hesitant to vote on anything that's not listed on the agenda. And so if somebody were to say, well, how about we don't put one here and we put one there instead, or how about we put one at all the cross streets, I wanted that to be an option. So that is now, we'll vote individually on all of those crosswalks. Are you suggesting though also that there would potentially need to be one between side streets? Or does that cover?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, the way I just heard you, it's going to be more than what's on the diagram originally that I have up here, which is fine. It just seemed like there was a lot of space. So that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And actually, I can answer your parklet question from earlier if you'd like. The parklets have been considered temporary in nature because they're not set in stone in their existing locations. The idea is each year we can put them anywhere. But I have spoken to the mayor about the fact that the parklet in front of Starbucks in Tenok is just so popular in that location that I think the reality is that one of the parklets is always going to go back in that location if the community has anything to say about it. And so at the point where we're putting the same parklet in the same spot every year, we absolutely need to go before traffic commission to vote on prohibiting those parking spaces, because it's, you know, it becomes very much not temporary anymore if every spring we come out and block the same 2 spaces and leave it there until November.
Thank you. Yeah, the only reason why I brought it up was when Ms. Phillips had mentioned, you know, when we change parking, it just rang a bell on that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, we have had that conversation. I mean, they were always intended to be temporary, but I think they're so popular and they came out so nice. People like them, and they're really a nice community amenity. And if we're going to put them in the same places, we need to do something about taking a vote.
Thank you, Councilor Garrett. Any other council for the first time before we go back to Councilor McMaster? Seeing none, Councilor McMaster, thank you for your patience.
Hello again, Ms. Parakis-Ellis. Thank you again for indulging me. I just have a few more questions. I guess one of the things you mentioned earlier was that you're aware that there's obviously a desire to improve Lower Main Street for everyone, especially the abutters. The condition of the street hasn't been in great shape for quite some time, and I've heard that from abutters as well. So I guess the question is, we focused a little bit on urgency and the need to get it done, and you talked about the bond and that the treasurer is going to want to see that money spent, the paving money. Is there, if we held off on this until the spring, and I know that's not what you want to do, because from even speaking with abutters who want to see the road paved, many of them have said that if it comes down to having to go through another winter, considering 2 years of what the abutters are used to with the poor condition of the road, the plates that were on the road, all of the issues, the defects to the road post infrastructural work. Do you think we'd be in a better position at all? And I realize you talked about that you explored other options, and there are certainly financial constraints. There are some other things that in an ideal world you would have been able to do. But do you think if we held off to the spring that we would, there would be a third design that might be a better fit for all stakeholders? I just think that's important to ask.
So the city staff has spent a lot of time on this project, and I think that the current recommended plan wouldn't change if we were to wait until the spring. I think we would still be advocating for the same plan. I think the abutters' opinions are unlikely to change over the winter. I think the cycling community's opinions are unlikely to change over the winter. So I don't really see what would happen any differently. I think if we were to look at, waiting until the spring and trying to come up with another $500,000 and putting in a raised cycle track on one side of the road, that would be amazing. But that would involve the same elimination of parking along the southbound side. And so I don't think the abutters are going to like it anymore. I think the cycling community would like it more, but I don't think, well, I guess that's not true. I was gonna say, I don't think they really have that many outstanding concerns, but some do. Some certainly do from last night's conversation, given that this is really a compromise of a plan. I just don't see a whole lot changing. And I also think that if we pave now and we stripe now, and then we come up with the money to move the curb in the spring and put in a cycle track on one side, that can still happen. I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's likely a big enough priority for the city to want to put $500,000 to that, given all the other competing interests that we have, needs for, starting the design on public safety buildings and all sorts of other things, school needs, other infrastructure. I'd be surprised if that was the direction that everybody wanted to go. But I really don't see the delay doing much other than keeping that road in terrible condition through the winter. We would also have to come back and black out all the pilot striping and stripe something else for the winter, which, we'd prefer not to do that again as well.
Thank you. And I'll just wrap up with two corridor related questions. People have reached out to me with concerns also about certain areas of the sidewalk on Lower Main Street, both in the north and south direction, as well as problem trees, trees that are either in poor condition or that have caused problems for abutters. At any stage in this process, was a sidewalk or tree assessment done?
So a tree assessment has not been done. We don't typically do a tree assessment of the existing trees as part of our capital projects, because that tends to happen as, just as time goes on, people request them. Sometimes, like on Ashmont Street, somebody had a tree they were concerned about, and they reached out to us when we were doing our capital project. We did an assessment. We concluded it was dead. We came and did a removal. And we can certainly do that for any trees that are of concern. We can assess any trees that people want assessed. But the timing is not really bound to the capital project, because the sidewalks we're not realigning any of the sidewalks. the grass strip will remain where it is. So I would suggest on trees, if anyone would like a tree assessment on a specific tree, that it's as simple as calling that into the DPW main number at 781-665-0142 and requesting a tree assessment. And then with sidewalks, we are in the spring going to replace any remaining sidewalk blocks. And if there are curb ramps that we don't get to this winter that need to wait till the weather improves, those will be done in the spring. So we'll definitely have a concrete crew from DNR out on site in the spring. And our plan is to replace any sidewalk blocks that have tripping hazards or other major concerns that we didn't get to with that earmark where we did the first 50,000 of sidewalks. So if you have any sidewalk locations, you can send them in a list to me and Vonnie, and we'll just make sure that those are assessed as part of the project.
That's great. I appreciate that. And I'd welcome the opportunity to walk the corridor with you too and just take a look at some of those locations and some of the trees that,
Okay.
that folks have reached out to me about. I do appreciate on the south lane that there was an effort after I reached out to you to cut back some of the trees that were overhanging. There were buses and with the reconfiguration trucks that were hitting some of those branches. Can we expect that to be done on the north side of the street too, where there are a lot of older trees as well that they have limbs that are creating some issues?
Yeah, if we have tree limbs, I'm gonna make a note to myself right now, but if there are limbs that need to be limbed up, we can absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Maybe some of
And the
them won't be there by the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay. Last
Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we're in for quite a storm.
Can only hope. Last question relates to trash barrels. We've had conversations about concerns about the trash contractor, their employees leaving barrels in the bike lanes. Understanding now with the redesign on the north side, that if that were to happen, bikers would be swerving out into the travel lane. What can be done? I know you've reached out to the contractor, you've spoken with the contractor directly, but what more can we do? Because it hasn't worked yet. And what can we do to hold them accountable once even now, but once we finalize the plan as a city?
So we haven't had that issue in the other areas where we have bike lanes. So I think some of it is a matter of the employees, the JRM employees, getting used to new configurations and making sure that they're respectful of them. Some of it is just, this is something we reiterate to JRM all the time, to put the trash barrels back where they took them from. That's our new mantra. I've had many conversations with the mayor and with actually some other trash hauling companies who we've been talking to about future contracts. Every street is different. Some have a bike lane, some have a grass strip, some have a sidewalk, some don't have a sidewalk. So the going theory is that they should just always put them back where they found them. And that's usually the most appropriate spot on any given street. So we've been trying to reiterate that to JRM. I know Councillor Stewart and I have had that conversation many times in his neighborhood. We say it over and over again. We've said it to the owner of the company. We've said it to the managers. We've said it to the employees. Our employees have followed them around and monitored and, the best we can do. But I do think that it hasn't been a problem in other neighborhoods with bike lanes. So some of it is just getting used to the configuration.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions for Director Parakis-Ellis. I think we can move on to the chiefs unless you or any of my colleagues have questions. Thank you, Ms. Parakis-Ellis.
Any councilors for the second time for Director Parakis-Ellis? Seeing none, Director Parakis-Ellis, thank you so much. Chief Lyle, does anyone have any questions for Chief Lyle? Thank you for being here, Chief.
You hear me? Thank you.
Council McMaster for Chief Lyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, when I had reached out to you in July to raise some concerns about the pilot project, you indicated at that time that you hadn't been consulted on the plan. Have you since had an opportunity to weigh in about the redesign?
I have had a couple of meetings, not with the public, with internal. And I did send an email to the chair of the traffic commission, President Elena Procasellas, with some concerns I have.
Between the pilot design and the redesign, do you have a preference?
Well, obviously, the second plan is far superior to the first plan, and I will say that.
What are the concerns that you have about the redesign, both as police chief and as a member of the traffic commission?
Well, as a resident, traffic commission, and as the police chief, safety is always the number one thing in my mind when I'm looking at anything. And the pilot program, I had real concerns, especially late at night. People would see the vehicles heading northbound, like it looks like a broken down vehicle late at night. And I went by there a couple different times, and I had concerns about that. And I give a lot of credit to the committee and anybody involved in that, and said, hey, wait a minute. And they took a different approach, and obviously there's a design change. As far as southbound, and I certainly spoke up about it, that with the elimination of the parking there, the road will appear to be wider than it really is for a motorist. And with cars parked there, the illusion to the operator heading southbound, the road is smaller. I got a feeling, a pretty confident feeling, once the road is repaved and it's striped, speeds will be going up and more complaints will be coming into the police department about speeding, particularly southbound.
Chief, you heard concerns both at the public comment section tonight, and over time, I know residents have reached out to you directly about the loss of parking heading in the southbound direction. From your perspective, do you think it's possible at all to have two dedicated bike lanes, one in each direction, and not reduce parking?
It depends. I don't know what the ideal bike lane width is. I do not know. I know that Upper Main Street area went up there. That varies from 4 feet to approximately 4.5 feet. It varies a little bit up there on Upper Main. But what's surprising is the most difficult intersection, correct me if I'm wrong, Elena Procasellas, that the Linfield's Parkway at Lincoln Street is a problematic intersection. I know the state, the DCR, Mass DOT, and everybody has been involved up there trying to make that a safer intersection. That's only 40 feet wide, which I was kind of surprised, the Linfield's Parkway at 40 feet wide. What they do is they have two dedicated bike lanes with a buffer, which I'm all in favor of. I really like that and appreciate that. The buffer lane is approximately 3 feet, car door opens, I get it. The bike lane 6 feet, the road's a little narrow at 10.6. So 10.5, it is a non-commercial roadway. Obviously, we do see trucks from time to time on the parkway. I really appreciated that design and layout, and that's an ideal situation. What we have on Main Street now is different. There's a lot of residents, a lot of commercial businesses throughout Main Street. It's a commercial truck route. For a lot of folks that don't know that is our biggest route for truck travel. It may work. It certainly would have to, be dialed in and looked at. Upper Main Street, I took various areas where intersection crosswalks were. That varied from 41 feet 6 inches. And that was at Boardman Ave. When you get to West Highland Ave, East Highland Ave, it jumps to 43.6. And then there's some other small variations. I get up to Morgan Street, there's no striping up there. The width of the roadway at Morgan, just north of that is 42 feet. You get on to Lower Main Street, it varies from 41 feet at Rockview. And Lodge, Kingsley, Potomac, it's anywhere from 46 to 40.8 inches. That's 40.6 inches. 40 feet 6 inches. Mount Vernon, surprising, 40 feet 3 inches there. It may work. That's with a 4 foot, but I believe that in the project, it's set up for 5 feet. So that may be tight. I know from history, every paved road that we do in the city, speeds go up. As soon as the roads are paved, they're actually smooth. And with the type of vehicles that folks drive nowadays, they're very comfortable. You really can't hear road noise. So all of a sudden you look at your speedometer and the speeds are up.
Chief, I'm sorry, my apologies. You can continue.
No, I'm available for any other questions. Those are the numbers that I ran today, and I had a great conversation with one of your constituents today who lives on Main Street. And he was real concerned about backing out of his driveway. So I went in his driveway and I looked and I said, yes, you have a problem. There's 2 trees that create a blind spot when he's pulling out of his driveway, whether he's heading northbound or southbound. So that's something that really should be looked at. And I mentioned to him, I said, you know, one concern for me is there's a lot of folks that live in this stretch here. I don't know if there's home health aides. He says, I have one for my mom. She lives with us and there is home health care and she will not park on our side. She has to walk across the street. I said, well, so maybe that can be worked out for you.
So based on what you mentioned and what we heard earlier from a resident, you know, presumably that risk exists already, that the trees were there before the, you know, the traffic, the configuration, the pilot configuration, and, you know, the trees aren't going anywhere. They're healthy trees. Ms. Parakaselis has mentioned in the past that it's the policy of the city not to remove healthy trees. But the concern, of course, now is accelerated in the sense that people are worried about backing out and striking a cyclist. Is there anything from your perspective that you think can be done in concert with this project to minimize that risk?
The only thing you could do actually is put signage there for notifying the bicyclists. Be care of, you know, blind spots passing driveways. And so there's a number of driveways there, just to put the alert to them that the driver can't always see you when they're backing out of their driveway.
Yeah, maybe when we walk the strip, Ms. Parakaselis, that's something we can look at if there are any particular driveways that, I think of 2, but there may be more. So that might just be something we can add to our agenda when we do that. Chief, naturally, if people are crossing the road more due to parking being eliminated on one side of the street, there are natural safety risks to that. Other than the crosswalks, can you think of any other pedestrian safety measures that you would recommend in connection with this project? Something we might look to do moving forward.
Well, clearly, line of sight for the pedestrian and the motorist, and Elena, Procasella, she chairs the traffic commission. She knows as well as I do that anytime a crosswalk is installed, the first thing we look at is line of sight for the pedestrian as well as the motorist approaching that crosswalk. So that's a big thing, and I know she'll certainly look into that before those lines are striped. And if there's branches or limbs that have to be trimmed, so be it.
What about traffic calming measures? Anything additional that you might recommend?
Obviously, speed signs, they have an effect on motorists, notify them. Some people don't realize how fast they're going, and the average driver will see that and alert them. I mean, there's a number of things, and it isn't always on the police department for speed enforcement. I remember when we had complaints galore on Upham Street, we went up there for several days. Citations, stopping cars, warnings, verbal warnings. As soon as we pulled back, the speed shot right up. So we know that speed enforcement by law enforcement isn't the only answer.
You and I have both.
I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, you and I have been out there, and you've done radar with me standing.
You were present when I ran it, yes, and I can show you flat out. Yep.
And I appreciate Director Parakaselis because she's been sensitive to the concerns about speed. Did some replating at the time when speeding was causing issues with the plates making noise for abutters, and she's aware that I had put in a request for 2 of the solar speed signs. I know we've heard from some residents who don't think that they're effective, but the data really suggests otherwise, that they may not be a panacea, but they do help. So I know I did want to give a shout out to Director Parakaselis because she has made sure that those are part of this project. Chief, I'll just wrap up with a couple opportunities, I think, for the police department moving forward. If the traffic commission does approve the plan for the dedicated bike lanes, I do think a refresher on Mass General Law, Chapter 89, Section D, would be helpful, just for officers, all officers, to be aware, who may not necessarily, be as informed or well versed on prohibitions of cars stopping or standing in bike lanes. So I would suggest that be that go out as a roll call announcement, or some sort of an education effort. And then the final thing is that we do have, I believe, 2, maybe 3 bicycle officers, and I'm wondering if we might be able to utilize the officers if the project is approved on Lower Main Street and in other parts of the city, but especially where we do have a new potential design where we'll see more bikers on the corridor there, to educate both motorists and bicyclists on rules of the road, and if necessary, and I know we certainly want to compel people to comply with traffic rules and regulations, but if it gets to the point where there are habitual offenders or egregious actions, enforcement, something to consider, maybe having the bicycle officers there. I also think that their presence in the community is good, is well received, and it's certainly a softer approach to interacting with law enforcement that might be worthwhile.
Right.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for Chief Lyle.
Thank you, Councilor McMaster. Are there any other councilors in the committee that have any questions for Chief Lyle? Councilor Eccles.
Thanks for being here, Chief. Just a quick question, kind of with the addition of the northern end bike lanes on the way to Wakefield, have there been any kind of key things we've learned as from a policing or traffic enforcement perspective there? Anything new happen?
As far as bicycle traffic, no. As far as some other motorist illegal activity, yes.
Gotcha. That was the only question I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Eccles. Any other city council for Chief Lyle? Chief, thank you for being here. Chief Kalina, thank you for your patience. Any councilors have any questions for Chief Lyle? Chief Kalina. Councilor McMaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. I know you've had a long day as well. You may recall conversations that we had during the pilot project about questions and concerns that I had about ladder trucks' ability to reach homes in the event on Lower Main Street in the event of a fire. Does that concern exist now with the redesign, or was that exclusive to the pilot?
That was exclusive to the pilot. Now with the redesign, it alleviated my concern. What you're talking about with the length of the ladder, we need to get as close to the curb as possible. It's not always practical with parked cars, but with the first plan and the protected bike lane, that would push out the ladder truck probably into the opposing lane to set up. And the farther we get away from our target, we lose working length of the ladder, any ladder for that matter.
Okay. Now, with respect to the new configuration, does that raise any concerns about fire apparatus accessing properties or hydrants on Lower Main Street? Is there anything that we should be aware of?
I don't have any concerns now that if the bike lane is on the outside of the parked cars.
Now, what about firefighters who will need to disembark a truck, whether it's because of a fire, any other type of emergency, or a crash that would bring them into the roadway? Any concerns in terms of that, considering that the roadway itself will be narrowed?
There's always concerns, and like Chief Lyle stated, my number one concern is the safety of our members on the fire department. And, you know, when you're getting off the truck, with the two lanes, north and south, close, you know, there's no middle of the road of the northbound or the southbound lane. It's really right on the edge of the yellow line. And so when the members are getting off the truck, usually they just have to worry about what's coming up from the rear. But now if you're on the yellow line, let's say, and you open the door, you have to worry about oncoming traffic, let alone getting off the truck, opening compartment doors, pulling equipment off. You know, firefighters get hit all the time. We've never had the issues down there. We were always able to pull over far enough. But I don't see the problem now with the painted bike lane on the outside of the parked cars. And I believe on the southbound lane, there's only going to be limited parking in front of the apartment buildings at Mount Vernon Street. So I'm much more comfortable with the second plan as it is for the safety of my members.
Okay, and Chief, you heard the questions that I asked Chief Lyle with respect to safety concerns. Any other general safety concerns from your perspective that you want to make known tonight for the council to consider?
I don't have any as it is with the bike lane.
Thank you, Chief. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for the latitude, and I want to thank my colleagues. I think, as everyone knows, this has really been the number one issue facing Ward 5, biggest issue in quite some time. So I appreciate that there was latitude with the rules, allowing me to ask more questions and give me more time than normal. I know that's something that we do try to extend to one another when these important issues come up in our wards. So I want to thank everybody for indulging me. I want to thank Ms. Parakaselis, Chief Lyle, Chief Kalina, and City Solicitor Phillips for their time tonight. Thank you.
Council McMaster, thank you so much. Anyone have anything else for Chief Kalina or any of our other guests tonight? Seeing no further questions, what is the will of the committee? Councilor Stewart?
I'd like to make a motion to put this order on file.
Second.
Motion to put order 2022-45 on file by Councilor Stewart, seconded by Councilor Eccles. Madam Clerk, Mr. Clerk of Committees, could you please call the roll?
Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Garape,
Yes.
Councillor McMaster,
Yes.
Councillor Eccles,
Yes.
Councillor Stewart,
Yes.
President Zanello. Yes. That's 6 yes.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk of Committees. Do I see a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Councilor Stewart, seconded by President Sinella. Clerk of Committees,
Chair
please
Thomas.
call the roll.
Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Garape.
Yes.
Councillor McMaster,
Yes.
Councillor Eccles,
Yes.
Councillor Stewart,
Yes.
President Zanello. Yes. That's 6 yes.
Thank you all very much. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.